Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie, and in this video I'll be looking at the weekend of October the 25th and 26th, 2025. As usual, I will be considering the astrology and the I Ching of the weekend, but additionally I want to spend a bit of time considering the White House, because the White House has been in the news. Donald Trump has just demolished the East Wing, and he wants to, I think, replace it with a ballroom. And this is a controversial decision. Some argue that it's for destruction of history. On the other hand, every now and then some big changes are made to the White House, and so perhaps it's nothing special. I don't know, but I will be looking at a few charts relating to the White House. I'll perhaps be looking at Donald Trump's chart as well, and maybe the United States' chart, to see if anything of note is going on. But first of all, let's look at the weekend. Here is the chart for the weekend, set for midnight on Sunday, October the 26th, New York time. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So here is the chart for the middle of the weekend, and you can see that the moon is in late Sagittarius, and in Sagittarius it's making a sextile to Venus. On Saturday we see moon sextile Venus, so that moon sextile Venus, it's a pretty nice aspect. We've got the moon in mutual reception to Jupiter, sextile Venus. That is an aspect that is good for relationships, good for getting on with people, not necessarily in an especially emotional way. Moon in Sagittarius, sextile Venus in Libra. It means that we can talk to people. It's quite an energetic aspect as well, because the moon is in Sagittarius. So, enjoy the moon in a fast sign, while it lasts. Also enjoy the moon being in mutual reception to Jupiter. Then, on Sunday, the moon moves on. It moves into very late Sagittarius, and it makes a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune. So, that is a bit more downbeat. You notice that, there is a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Of course, Neptune has now gone back into Pisces. So with that moon aspecting the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, there may be some uncertainty. There are certainly things we would like to be doing. Moon in Sagittarius, it's quite an excitable placement for the moon, but square Saturn and Neptune, there may be concerns. How far can we take things? And then, right at the end of the weekend, the moon moves into Capricorn. In terms of the UK, that takes place Sunday evening or late Sunday afternoon at 5:53 p.m. That would be 6:53 p.m. in, say, Paris or Rome or Berlin. And from the Americas' perspective, well, it's earlier on Sunday, maybe around lunchtime, even late morning, the moon moves into Capricorn. So on Sunday, there could be a change of emphasis as the moon moves into an earth sign. And for most of the weekend, as I've said, the moon is in Sagittarius, and there aren't any planets in earth. And so perhaps it's good to have a planet moving into Earth, but we've always got this elemental imbalance to worry about. So, when the moon was or is in Sagittarius, okay, we've got a planet in fire signs. We've got the moon in a fire sign, the only planet in a fire sign. Then when the moon moves into Capricorn, there's no fire, but we've got a planet in Earth. So that is a reminder that these two elements of fire and earth are pretty minimal at the moment. And so, what does it really mean for there to be no earth and fire? I've already discussed this, but from a Jungian perspective, earth and fire, they are the irrational axis. It's not about the intellect or the emotions working things out. We use earth and fire to make instant decisions. The fire might be an instant decision based on intuition, or earth might be an instant decision based on just what things look like, how they seem on the surface, their material composition. But we just don't have access to that irrationality. I mean, by the way, irrationality, I do not mean that in a bad sense. It's just a traditional way of looking at things from a philosophical point of view. When we talk about rationality, we're talking about our own capacities, our own intellectual and emotional capacities, which doesn't need any outside help. We don't have to analyze data, and that's the great thing about earth and fire. But water and air, we have to analyze the data. Perhaps it's emotional data, perhaps it's factual data, and so there is this issue of elemental imbalance, at the moment, and we do have a trine between Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury has just made a trine to Jupiter. I think it made that trine to Jupiter on Friday, and now on Saturday it's making a trine to Saturn. So that means that we do have a grand trine in water signs. Mercury on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. I was considering making the grand trine in water signs my special topic for the weekend, but I think I'm going to wait for a few days because Mars is starting to make trines to Jupiter and Saturn. I mean, you can see that Mars is getting very close to that trine of Jupiter, and early next week it makes a trine to Jupiter, then it moves on to the trine of Saturn. So I think I'm going to just hold off for a few days before discussing in detail this grand trine in water signs. But there is a grand trine in water signs this weekend involving Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn, and this grand trine is watery. It is quite emotional. You've got Mercury in Scorpio. Mercury in Scorpio perhaps is trying to understand things, and perhaps is able to understand things. And Mercury in Scorpio doesn't necessarily say much. Scorpio is one of the mute signs, along with Pisces and Cancer. I mean, it's mute because of the animals that it symbolizes it with. The traditionally, the idea that scorpions, fish, and crabs don't make any noise. I don't know whether that's true or not. So they don't make much noise, and Mercury is just taking it all in. And maybe that's something we can do. Maybe we don't have to talk so much. We can just feel what's going on, and feel what's going on, at quite a wide level. Mercury hitting both Jupiter and Saturn, and Jupiter and Saturn are the rulers of time, and they talk about how things move from one stage to another. With Jupiter, we've got expansion. Perhaps we think about inflation with Jupiter. Then Saturn, we've got retraction and perhaps even recession. And so with Mercury making this grand trine, some of us may have a good understanding of the way the economy is working. And, understanding how the economy is working, well, that's not just about reading the financial pages of the newspaper. It can just be about a feeling. You notice things, and you just you understand how things are working. But when you notice things, perhaps you just observe what people are doing, or you just have a feeling about the way people are, and that's just telling you about the way the economy is moving. And from an economic perspective, I mean, this is what the Jupiter-Saturn trine is about. And I do want to talk about the Jupiter-Saturn trine in some detail, but I think I'm going to wait for a few days, wait till Mars makes a trine to those two planets. And so, that is the situation in New York. If we set the weekend, midnight on Sunday for New York, if we make it Sydney instead. So here's a picture for Sydney, Australia, in the middle of a weekend. Moon is earlier in the sign. So the moon is going to be in Sagittarius for the whole weekend. I don't think you need to worry about the moon moving into Capricorn. I think that will no. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, at no point in the weekend will the moon get into Capricorn. So it is all about the moon in Sagittarius, and perhaps right at the end of the day, and at the end of Sunday, the moon will be making that square to Saturn and Neptune. But that's really at the end of the weekend, so perhaps that's not something you have to worry about. So that's a picture in Australia or New Zealand. Not a great deal of difference between what's happening in Australasia and the US. And then there is there's one aspect I missed. I should have talked about it earlier. And that is a sesquiquadrate between Venus and Uranus. If you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I'm into sesquiquadrates and semi-squares. So Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. And I do think that this is an important aspect. It may be more important than Mercury trine Jupiter. So when you think about Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, you might think about relationships and how other people behave. And so if Venus is sesquiquadrate Uranus, that could be that people behave in a way that is somewhat unexpected. We can't assume that other people are always going to behave in the same way. And with Venus in Libra, that is about balance, wanting things to be done in a particular way, not trying to cause too much upset. But then Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus. Uranus wants to be rebellious. Uranus wants to create change. Maybe Uranus wants to create some upset. So that might be how Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus works. There's an alternative view of Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, and it might be about art and aesthetics. I mean, that's what Venus is about. And so it's possible that we might be attracted to particular art forms which might be unusual. And if we are artistic, even if we're not artistic, we can get into it. Perhaps we are trying to create something or decorate something, and our tastes might be somewhat unusual with Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus. And Venus is kind of linked to Pluto as well. I mean, it's not necessarily an aspect that's immediately obvious, but there is a micro aspect between Venus and Pluto coming up. I think it's a 24th harmonic conjunction between Venus and Pluto. I mean, I wouldn't worry about that too much, but there just may be something about relationships and artistic expression which is slightly unusual, and perhaps wanting to do things differently. So now I just want to look at the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. That is the heliocentric picture. Oh, it should be, but I need to switch it around to put the sun in the center. There we go. So what we have today, or this weekend, is a conjunction between Mercury and Pluto. There it is, the heliocentric conjunction, and the Earth is involved. So this aspect may be quite important. So we've got the Earth. We are living on the Earth, and what are we experiencing on this Earth? We are experiencing a square to Pluto, and we are also experiencing a square to Mercury. Now, the thing is, Earth square Pluto, or Sun square Pluto, they're the same aspect. Sun square Pluto from a geocentric perspective, Earth square Pluto from a heliocentric perspective, they're the same aspect. These aspects are not unusual. There will be Earth square Pluto twice a year, But what might be unusual heliocentrically is the fact that Mercury is also involved. And so this weekend might actually indicate some quite serious thinking. We are perhaps able to look under the surface. And with Mercury conjunct Pluto, there may be a question of influence. Who is influencing who? And Mercury conjunct Pluto, there is a propaganda aspect to this, trying to change people's minds, change people's views, being manipulative with words. So that may be something you're noticing. I mean, for example, if you're in the United States, got an election coming up on November the 4th. Now that election, you're not electing the president or the vice president or anything like that, but there are other supposedly more sort of minor elections going on. For example, in this city, we've got city council elections coming up. 4 out of the 7 city councillors are coming up for election, and so watch how people are campaigning, knocking on doors, how they're trying to persuade you, how they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And this can all be about how Mercury conjunct Pluto works, and then the Earth is linked with it. And so we really do get the feel that someone is trying to be persuasive. Perhaps they're trying to persuade us to think something we shouldn't necessarily be thinking. There's a lot of sort of lies and half-truths flying around. But perhaps we want to be the one doing the persuading. If we wanted to be persuasive, wherever we are. I'm not just talking about the United States election campaign. I'm talking about anywhere. It affects all of us. So, do consider that aspect involving the Earth and the Mercury-Pluto conjunction. And now I want to switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of October the 25th and 26th, 2025. Aries. Certainly for the first part of the weekend, you are able to see things maybe with different eyes. You can get a new perspective. You don't have to be satisfied, with, the way things are. You can, be adventurous. You can perhaps play with ideas. It's good to play with ideas. Recently you've been perhaps, rather, single-minded. You've had, you've still got Mars in Scorpio. You've still got Mercury conjunct Mars in Scorpio. So that does make you single-minded, but it can be taken too far. And I think that, at the beginning of a weekend, you have the opportunity to play, to explore different views, and maybe you can let go of some of your prejudices. I mean, I'm not trying to put you down by suggesting that you have prejudices. We all have prejudices, every single one of us. And at the moment, Aries, you are aware that there are certain things that you feel very, very strongly about in a way that is not always entirely logical. And at the moment, Aries, you perhaps have a chance to explore, get involved with different ideas, and perhaps get in touch with something else, something that might be beyond your normal experience. And this process of discovery, won't necessarily go on forever. At some stage, you've got to decide what matters, what is important, and then you will have a chance to switch into being more dynamic, and not just more dynamic, but perhaps more focused. I mean, you're already focused, but perhaps you just over the last day, over the weekend, or at least some of the weekend, you do have a chance to be more exploratory and not feel that you have to be tied with any fixed way of looking at things. And in the process, Aries, you perhaps can look at other people and their views. And, if you try with, the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and this sextile to Venus on Saturday is going to just be helpful. It's going to make you pleasant, and I think that you'll know what to say, and if there's someone you want to ingratiate yourself with, I think you'll know what to do, and you'll know what levers to pull. So from a social point of view, I think the weekend starts on a really very good footing. Having said that, Aries, you're aware that nothing is entirely straightforward, and you're also aware that no one can be entirely trusted. People can do strange things, and at the same time, you can sort of see what is wrong. So if there's something wrong, you'll just know. And if anyone is behaving in a way that is out of order, is even immoral, evil, even corrupt, perhaps you'll be able to spot it. And once you spot something, because fundamentally Aries is an uncomplicated sign. It's honest and straightforward. And, I know that some people think that Aries is selfish, but selfish is just about being honest. I mean, that's what it is. And you might honestly see that not everything is right. And the question is, what do you do about it, and what actions do you feel are necessary? And as you move into Sunday, it's possible that things do start to get complicated. I mean, not terribly complicated, but you might find that some of your efforts to explore, to find out what's going on, hit a bit of a block. You feel you've gone as far as you can go. Indeed, perhaps as far as you want to go, and you might reach a stage where you feel that maybe you're asking too many questions. You're being too curious, because if you are curious, in the end, you might find out something that you just don't want to know. And then the moon moves into Capricorn. Now, this moon movement into Capricorn, it's very late. It's very late in the weekend. It's on a Sunday. So is that really going to be important? I mean, it could be important, and it may be, as the weekend draws to a close, you start to think about, what is important. What is important for you right now? What do you have to get together? What do you have to focus on? And perhaps you'll be starting to think about next week, and the moon stays in Capricorn as Sunday moves into Monday, as the working week starts, and possibly this moon moving into Capricorn, is a good thing. It allows you to align with whatever is important, and also whatever matters in terms of your goals and ambitions. Taurus. For much of the weekend, maybe all of the weekend, the moon is moving through Sagittarius. And with the moon in Sagittarius, you might be looking at things and saying, well, things are not necessarily entirely straightforward. I mean, that I think is going to be clear. You know that you can't take what people say at face value, and you always have to look under the surface. What is being hidden? What are the hidden messages? And that sort of hints at a complication that very often Taurus doesn't necessarily want to deal with. I mean, Taurus, in some respects, is a grounded sign which likes people to be straightforward and down to earth, and it may be missing. The the support may not be there, the grounding may not be there, and maybe you'll take the view that certain people are making things, more complicated than they have to be. But that's your view. Sometimes things just have to be complicated. And if you assume that everything is going to be complicated, and I think that is the right approach, you might then be pleasantly surprised when things turn out to be not so difficult as you had expected. But also, Taurus, at some level, you yourself are looking for change. You are kind of restless. And Taurus is not a sign that is normally known for its restlessness, but you know that something needs to change, and the sooner it can change, the better. And if something has got boring, if it's been going on for too long, then you might want to change it. And this is something that you can do. So if you're not comfortable with a situation, or if you do feel it's gone on too long, then you can take action, and you can create a considerable amount of turmoil if that's what you want to do. And by and large, Taurus, it's probable that Saturday is going to be an easier day than Sunday. I mean, on Saturday we've got Moon sextile Venus, and with Moon sextile Venus, I mean that aspect is quite sensitive, and at the same time you're able to behave in a way that is reasonable, and you understand that things aren't simple, but you also understand that other people have their tolerances, and you're not going to push things too far, and you're going to be fairly respectful of other people's boundaries with that Moon sextile Venus. But then the Moon moves away from that sextile to Venus, and then that Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus that I've been talking about starts to cut in, and there just might be things you start doing. You feel yourself kind of compelled, because the old order is not really working, and you do want to make some changes, and that might be for the best. But as soon as you start creating difficulties, well, it's going to be difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. So what could cause problems? Well, there is a possibility that you're looking at things from quite a practical level, and it may be even quite an obsessively practical level. And the reason for that is that for much of a weekend, the Moon is in Sagittarius. It's not in Capricorn. And with the Moon the Moon not being in Capricorn, that means there's no Earth. And so because of that, there may be a temptation to compensate, to get really concerned about practical matters, because you're trying to compensate for the fact that there is no Earth out there. And so, Taurus, you might feel that you just have to raise issues of a material or perhaps financial nature. You have to bring it out into the open, and you perhaps have to mention money, or mention questions of how much someone is contributing, or just making a point that might be ever so slightly disruptive, and perhaps you're making someone feel bad about themselves, and maybe someone might feel bad about their finances because of something you say, but maybe there's just something you just have to say. You just can't help it. And so, Taurus, do think about what you say. The Moon is in Moon is in Sagittarius, as I've said, and Sagittarius can be a sign which can be just tactless. You're trying to be honest. You are honest, but sometimes honesty isn't the best policy, and it can be, it can be really disruptive. And then, at some stage this weekend, okay, it might not be until Monday if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but the Moon does move out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn. And I think that when the moon moves into Capricorn, you're perhaps going to be feeling more grounded. You may find the grounding that you thought was gone, and there might be a sense of comfort there, feeling that you've kind of arrived. And if you're feeling secure and comfortable, then it's easier for you to relax, and probably you're going to be more reasonable, and you're not going to be focused on small details, a kind of small detail that might upset people, because you yourself feel more secure. And maybe with the moon in Capricorn, you can start to to think about things in a different way, and realize that perhaps you haven't got all the answers, and that doesn't bother you anymore. You can ask people, find out, look for solutions, with an open mind. And you're thinking about your own interests. I mean, that's what happens when the moon is in Capricorn. But because you care about your own interests, you know that you need to find out more, that you can't be satisfied with your existing knowledge level. So that might be something to think about as you move towards the end of the weekend. Gemini. There is a grand trine in water signs, and this grand trine in water signs is likely to affect you. And the reason is because Mercury is involved in this grand trine. You've got Mercury in Scorpio, trine Jupiter, trine Saturn. So that Mercury trine Jupiter, well, I think that took place on Friday, and then the Mercury trine Saturn is taking place on Sunday. But I think for the whole weekend, you're going to be feeling that grand trine. And, with this grand trine, it's quite an easy influence. I mean, it's a grand trine. It's not like a grand cross. Trines represent ease. Trines represent something moving quickly. There's no resistance. It's all very, very straightforward and simple. I mean, at least, you can make it simple, and you can make the most apparently difficult tasks really easy. So maybe something you thought was going to be a real effort, it just be completely straightforward. And also, Gemini, it does seem that small changes you make can make a big difference. They could be small incremental changes. You might change, some aspect of your daily routine. You might do something a bit early. You might switch the order of something. Maybe you're used to doing task 1 first and task 2 second, but you decide to do task 2 first and task 1 last, and so it's a small change to your routine. But you make a small change to your routine, and it can actually make a big difference. And it might confuse people, it might encourage them to ask questions, but it does show your own power. And also, it's a time perhaps to be taking notes in quite a methodical way. I mean, you can take notes in many different ways. I'm sure there are electronic ways of taking notes. It doesn't have to be with a sort of pen and paper. But by taking notes, Gemini, you can really start to understand the way things are working and the way things are moving. And this is all about Mercury hitting through trines. The great chronocrators, the rulers of time. Jupiter and Saturn are connected with cycles, the economic cycle, the business cycle, where society is heading, and all of this makes sense to you. And from your angle, you just want things to be as simple as possible, and you start to see the obvious. I mean, you can see the obvious, provided you're looking at things, with open eyes, and your lens, your glasses, your spectacles are in good condition, unlike mine. I definitely need a new pair of glasses. That's something I've got to do as soon as possible. So perhaps on a symbolic level, one does need a new pair of glasses. Hey, I'm talking to a Gemini, I'm talking to myself. Just a reminder, I have noted that I do need a new pair of glasses. And my eyes are kind of going out of sync. But it should be straightforward. You can see, and you can. And if you can't see, you know why you're not seeing. You know where the smudges are. You know what's obscuring your vision. And once your vision is clear, then you will definitely see how things are working and how things are unfolding. And you don't, Gemini, have to do everything on your own. You don't have to make all the decisions yourself. You don't have to be completely reliant on your own judgment. I mean, the moon is in Sagittarius this weekend, and the moon in Sagittarius, it's in your opposite sign, a part of your horoscope that is very linked with the other. And the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. Jupiter is ruler of Sagittarius, and so in the Gemini horoscope, the planet Jupiter very often does say something about relationships and how you relate to other people. And so I think that you do have the chance to find ways of getting on with people that might be different, that might be liberating. And don't forget, we've also got Mercury trine Jupiter, even though that aspect was exact on Friday. It still continues into the weekend, and it's indeed that Mercury trine Jupiter. It does form part of the grand trine. So it may be that another person is very much part of your energy and the way things flow. And so try not to do things on your own, because with another person's help, with the right person's help. I mean, it's not like everyone can be helpful, but some people definitely can. Yeah, things can very much start to move, and your ability to form connections with other people at the moment, Gemini, I think is really very good. Now, it is true that at the end of the weekend, the moon does move out of Sagittarius and moves into Capricorn. And so, when the moon moves into Capricorn, it could make things slightly more complicated. So, it's important to take advantage of people. When I say take advantage, I mean make the most of being close to people who could be useful. I don't mean take advantage of them in a bad way, but do make the most of the people around you while you've got the chance. Because when the moon moves into Capricorn, things might change, things might become more complicated, things may not be quite so smooth and easygoing, and so ideally you would have sort of made your feelings clear and made your social efforts, and you don't have to make much of an effort before the moon goes into Capricorn. Yeah, when the moon moves into Capricorn, other things start to come to the surface, and things might become a little bit complicated, but it's going to happen pretty late into the weekend, and maybe into Monday if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And when I talk about the astrology for Monday, I'll be going into more detail about what the moon in Capricorn means for you. Cancer, you have a chance to take stock of things. Sometimes it's important to take stock. You have allowed things to reach a certain stage, which is good. It's a natural movement, but sometimes you just have to stop and understand what you've done so far. Because if you just keep moving, then you might just lose track of things, and it's a good idea if you can just give yourself a chance to really work out what has happened and what has changed. And it could be something that is at first somewhat tedious, just not something you really wanted to do. You perhaps felt you could just make a little more progress, a few more steps forward, but sometimes things reach a natural halt. And it's a temporary halt, but it's a natural halt as well. And so Cancer, perhaps you should spend certainly Saturday, just taking stock of things, and it shouldn't be too difficult. The moon is in Sagittarius; it's in mutual reception to Jupiter by sign. They're in each other's sign, and Jupiter is moving through your sign. And this Moon-Jupiter mutual reception just allows you to, get yourself together. And from a health perspective, I think that Moon mutual reception to Jupiter is going to be, quite good. And on Saturday, of course, you've got Moon sextile Venus, and so with Moon sextile Venus, that is a time when perhaps Cancer, you should be just relaxing and doing something that is just reassuring and perhaps recharging your batteries. That's a good way to approach things as you go into the weekend. You don't want to take on too much responsibility, just responsibility for the sake of it. And that is the right approach. Now, there are limits to the extent in which you can just do nothing. You can't do nothing all weekend. You've got to think about other things. And there is a grand trine in water signs, involving Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. You are a water sign, so this grand trine. It's an easy energy. So perhaps with this grand trine, it means that you might become ever so slightly lazy. But again, is there a problem with being lazy? I mean, if being lazy helps you to relax, then that's not really a problem, is it? And relaxation is something that you should welcome, and relaxation means looking after yourself, looking after your body, looking after your mind, just making sure that you are in tune with everything. Though I still think that you're not going to be entirely inactive. The moon, makes a trine to Jupiter. It also makes a trine to Saturn, and that trine between the moon and did I say a trine to Saturn? No, I meant a square to Saturn. The moon does square Saturn on Sunday, and it also makes a square to Neptune. And so that does mean that probably Saturday is going to be an easier day than Sunday. On Sunday, perhaps a few issues might come to the surface. You perhaps realize that something doesn't entirely agree with you, and that might be a good realization to have. Perhaps you realize that something has been exhausting, something has been undermining you. Maybe it's a person, and you can see the tension, you can see the clash, you can perhaps even see the incompatibility. But I wouldn't necessarily read too much into it. It just may be an opportunity to deal with something that perhaps hadn't been dealt with before, and perhaps with moon square Saturn, you have a chance. And if you do find yourself having some kind of altercation on Sunday, I think it's going to be quite a finely balanced thing. It's not like you're at a disadvantage, or even that the other person is at a disadvantage. It may be that you're dealing with you and someone who is in their own way quite strong, and somehow you have to find some kind of accommodation. And I think you can find accommodation by the end of a weekend, as you move into Monday, as the moon moves into Capricorn, as the moon moves into your opposite sign, and with that moon moving into Capricorn, it's making a sextile to the sun, and I think that suggests that after a bit of a wobble, you can sort of rediscover your harmony. So overall, this weekend, I'm not saying that it's going to be dramatic, but I think your first priority over the weekend is to just look after yourself and make sure that mind and body are in harmony with one another. Leo. At the moment, Leo, we have still got a square between Sun and Pluto. So yesterday I made quite a big thing about this Sun-Pluto square. And the Sun-Pluto square, not as powerful as it was yesterday on Friday, but still very much there. And because of this Sun square Pluto, you may feel that something perhaps has to be held back. You don't want to give it away. And perhaps you're considering, whatever it might be that appears to be threatening you. Now, I don't want to make you paranoid. I'm not saying anything is threatening you, but you might nonetheless have a perception that there are threats out there which do need to be taken seriously. And like yesterday or like Friday, you could be of a suspicious nature. You might regard certain people as being dangerous, or perhaps obsessed with their own power and importance. And as far as you're concerned, you might just have to be firm, hold on to what is important, and not take risks. Now, I think that you would probably be overcautious if you took that approach. I think that if you are trusting, I'm not saying you have to be totally trusting, but if you are reasonably trusting and you give people a chance, then you might be able to see things in a different way. You could find that people are more reasonable than you had realized, and you might also find that your own ability to get on with people without compromising anything is actually surprisingly good. So, Leo, you do have a chance to circulate and to find social variety. Especially with the moon in Sagittarius. I mean, it's great the moon is in Sagittarius. It's in a sign that is Leo friendly, and of course the moon is in a fire sign. And perhaps, Leo, you should take advantage of the moon being in a fire sign, because at the end of the weekend the moon moves into Capricorn, and for a short period of time there'll be no planets in fire signs, and so you might find at some stage, perhaps late in the weekend, that suddenly everything stops, all the energy goes, and if you haven't got something together by that stage, you might have missed your opportunity. So while you have the energy, I would suggest that you use this energy, and ideally you will find ways to do things which are satisfying, which are an essential part of who you are. And in the process, you might have to take a few minor risks. I mean, what kind of risks? Well, the risks of the unknown, particularly the social unknown, not knowing how people are going to behave, how people are going to respond to you. There's always the risk of being rejected, or not being taken seriously, or not being given the support you feel, or being rejected. All these risks are there. But even in a worst case scenario, it's not the end of the world. So perhaps you should take a chance, and perhaps take a chance on other people, because if you give them a chance, maybe they'll give you a chance as well. Virgo. Mercury is very much the planet in focus this weekend, particularly on Saturday. And what we've got is Mercury trine Saturn, and on Friday we had Mercury trine Jupiter. So we have a grand trine in water signs, and this grand trine is really helpful from your perspective. It allows things to move in a way that is just easy. And so maybe, Virgo, you go into the weekend thinking that things are going to be difficult, that everything is going to be an effort, but really it needn't be. If you just perhaps suspend belief, you might think that something is impossible, there's no point in giving it a go. But if you do give it a go, then I think you're going to find that things run very quickly and they don't require much effort on your part. And so just a little push, a small push, is just enough to get things going. And so it's very important, Virgo, that you believe in yourself, and also that you don't try too hard. Very important that you don't try too hard. If you try too hard, if you're obsessed about success and failure, then it's not going to be so good. Because it should all come naturally, and I think it will all come naturally. And so perhaps you should just follow your heart, follow your emotions. Where are your emotions taking you? Now that's not something one normally associates with Virgo. I mean, Virgo tries to be quite analytical, tries to sort of cut through the emotions and think about what is important. But sometimes, Virgo, you can let go. And right now, your ability to socialize and to move from one place to another, maybe one social scene to another, is pretty good. And you talk to one person in a particular way and you adjust to their personality and their priorities, and then you move to another person and you start again, and you rebalance, and you can constantly rebalance. I think you'll be very good at constantly rebalancing. I mean, rather like perhaps a social butterfly. I mean, one doesn't normally associate Virgos with being social butterflies, but if you want to be a social butterfly, I mean, I think you can, because you'll be able to spread your wings and sort of fly across the emotional currents. And I think that somehow you'll just understand where to go, where to move, and it should all work very well. And in the process, I think that people are going to like you, and also in the end you can create some stability and structure. It might not seem like it at the time, but once you get into the spirit of things, you'll start to know what is important, without really having to think about it very much. And perhaps you can create for yourself some social stability. You perhaps don't know where you are with one particular person, or perhaps even a group of people, and that might be what you're feeling like at the beginning of a weekend. And you do, in the end, have a chance to create stability and constancy in a social sense. And then as you move into Sunday, maybe things will start to become more difficult. So ideally, Virgo, you should concentrate your active energies on Saturday. On Sunday, it's possible that you might sort of run into a bit of a hurdle, even a brick wall. I mean, the moon makes a square to Saturn, and that moon square Saturn might feel that you're stopped. You've gone as far as you can, and you've reached not just your own limits, but perhaps you've reached another person's limits. And that's good to know. Perhaps you'll know how far you can take things with another person, or perhaps you'll start to realize the limits of their knowledge, or perhaps the limits of their usefulness. It might be a bit disappointing, but you could argue that that is good to know. And then the moon does move into Capricorn. So the moon moving into Capricorn, well, when it happens, it happens late afternoon, early evening in Europe. It'll happen earlier, when I say, late afternoon, early evening on Sunday in Europe. And in the Americas, sort of late morning, lunchtime, something like that on Sunday. So it kind of depends a bit on your time zone. But, when the moon moves into Capricorn, that does mean the moon is moving into an earth sign. And, when the moon moves into an earth sign, Virgo, that will allow you to perhaps make sense of things. And that had been perhaps difficult in the past because there have been no other planets in Earth, no planets in Earth. And of course, Virgo is an earth sign. So when you get the moon moving into Capricorn, you might start to get a sense of what is real and what is important, and that had been perhaps difficult during the first part of the weekend. Moving from place to place, maybe being a social butterfly, but where was it? Where was it going? Where were you going to stop? What were you going to alight on? That is important. You can't be flying around forever. At some stage, you've got to say, well, I'm going to stop here. Here's a nice secure branch for me to sit on. If you're a social butterfly, and finding that sense of security and grounding, I think you will find it at the end of a weekend. So if at the beginning of a weekend you're not quite sure where you're going, you're not quite sure where you're going to land, well, don't worry about it, because in the end it will all resolve itself. Libra. Venus is right in the middle of your sign. It's at 15 degrees Libra, so halfway through. And I hope you're making the most of Venus being in its own sign, being in your sign, you being able to be yourself, and also, I hope, getting on with everyone. You can get on with everyone if you want to get on with everyone. Librans can be socially very fluent, and they know how to behave, and they know where the balance lies, and that is important. And it works in two ways. If you know where the balance lies, you know how to maintain everything on a stable note. But also, if you know where the balance lies, you know how to upset the balance. You are acutely aware of other people's weak points. You're also aware of what it takes to cause an eruption, at least a social eruption. And the thing about Venus is that we've got some mixed messages here. So the moon is making a sextile to Venus on Saturday, and moon sextile Venus, it's a great aspect. And with moon sextile Venus, moon in Sagittarius, sextile Venus in Libra, you can very much be yourself. And the moon in Sagittarius, it's quite an open-minded sign. It's able to communicate in a way that is free and flowing, and you're not going to hold back. And I think that is going to be appreciated, and you'll know how far you can go, but you'll also know what it takes to take things too far. And Venus isn't just making a sextile to Venus. Venus is not just making a sextile to the moon. It's also making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. And this sesquiquadrate between Venus and Uranus is arguably the main aspect of the weekend. Certainly from a Libran view, because Venus is your ruler. And so with Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, you do have a chance to perhaps upset things if you want to, because Uranus is a planet of revolutions. It's a planet of dramatic change, and it could be that you have sort of interesting ideas, and these ideas may not be exactly reassuring. They could be unusual, and you might want to play with ideas. You might want to play with concepts. And if you were to do that, and if you were to be quite open about it, you never know what kind of response you might get. I don't know what kind of Libran you are. Don't they say you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics? I mean, if you want to talk about religion and politics, well, go ahead. You never know what might happen, and that would be a good explanation of Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, or perhaps should I say a manifestation of Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, perhaps causing chaos, causing disruption by discussing religion and politics. So that's one way in which Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus could work. But it may just represent your impatience. You're quite capable of coming over as being calm and reasonable. But deep down you are impatient. You want things to happen, you want things to change. And if everyone is getting on with each other and if everyone's happy, then at some deep level you might just be nervous about it. And bizarrely, even perversely, if you've got a bit of tension from other people, if other people start to react, at some level you yourself might start to calm down. It can work like that. And so with Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus, I think perhaps it's about you expressing your individuality and not worrying too much about the cost. And in your individuality, well, it might be you want to express your views. It's okay to have views. Or you might want to talk about what you find beautiful. You maybe want to express what you find beautiful, what you find to be attractive. And that might not be to everyone's liking. So that's another way in which Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus could be disruptive. And the question is, Libra, do you want to be disruptive? And if you want to be disruptive, where is it all going? What is your plan? And so if you can answer that question, then you can basically do what you feel is right, and don't worry too much about other people's concerns. I mean, it is important, after all, that you are able to express yourself freely up to a point. And you should remember that late in the weekend the moon moves into Capricorn. And okay, it might not be until Monday if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but when the moon moves into Capricorn, it's possible that your priorities change. So, by the end of Sunday, you're thinking that maybe you need a little bit of calm. And if you had created a load of disharmony, if you'd created an argument out of nothing, if you'd upset people because it felt like a fun thing to do, and then you decide you want to calm everything down and you want everything to be straightforward, well, that could be difficult. And so you might have kind of undone things for yourself. So if you are going to stir things up, make sure you're able to see it through, and make sure that you're able to deal with the consequences. And if you have any doubts, maybe you should make a special effort to resist the temptation about Venus sesquiquadrate Uranus. Well, maybe not. On the other hand, if you feel that it's important to be an individual, if you feel it's important to express yourself, that circumstances are such that now is your time to really be yourself, well, what can you do? Maybe you just have to be open, be honest, and hope for the best. Scorpio. We still have a lot of planets in Scorpio. The moon may have left Scorpio, but we've still got Sun, Mars, and Mercury in this sign. And, the Sun is still making a square to Pluto. It may not be as exact as it was yesterday, but still very much in evidence. And, because of this, you could be quite stubborn, and it might be, difficult to change your mind. And once you had decided that you're going to be yourself, once you've decided what's important to you, are you going to change? Probably not. I mean, Scorpios can find change very difficult, especially when the Sun is making a square to Pluto. But it's possible, Scorpio, that you're worrying too much about something. You're taking something just too seriously. And Sun square Pluto, it's a fascinating aspect, but once you take something too far, well, it can be quite destructive, and it can be quite limiting as well. So it's possible with Sun square Pluto that you only go in one direction and you don't see other possibilities. And so, Scorpio, perhaps you've got to be open to other possibilities, and perhaps even you need to lighten up, because one thing that is going on today, aside from the remnants of the Sun square Pluto, is that we have got a grand trine in water signs. You've got Mercury in Scorpio. It's trine Saturn. It's trine Jupiter. Well, it was trine Jupiter on Friday. It's trine Saturn on Saturday. And this grand trine in water signs, Scorpio, suits you very well, or at least it should. I mean, you are a water sign. So with this grand trine, things can move quickly, and your mind can move quickly, and you can understand what is happening. And that's very important. This grand trine with Mercury aspecting Jupiter and Saturn. You remember, Jupiter and Saturn are these great sort of controlling energies. They say so much about the world in which we are living. And in Jupiter and Saturn just are telling us about how time is unfolding, how time is elapsing, and how things change. And when we're talking about change, we're talking about the world around us. And you are not detached from the world around you. The world of governments, news, events, trends, protests, the economy. It's all there. It's all important. And it's no good just saying you're beyond it all, because you're not beyond it all. None of us are beyond it all. And, if you make the effort, you can really understand what is happening, and it can guide you. And, Scorpios, when they're on good form, can have incredible insight into the way everything is working on a really quite mundane level very often. For example, knowing which way the markets are heading and so on. I mean, obviously, I'm not telling you that you should absolutely trust your instincts about the markets if the markets are of any interest to you. And of course, when it comes to finance, I've got nothing to say of any use. This is not a financial channel, but I think you do or can have a good understanding of the way trends are working. So with this grand trine in water signs, do make the most of it, and also go into this whole thing with your eyes open. Don't turn away if you're becoming aware of something that doesn't look very nice. And what you are seeing is society in its raw form. You're seeing aspects perhaps of its collapse, of its demise, and you're certainly able to see how awful people can be. And that doesn't necessarily affect you, shouldn't affect you, but it is good to know that people can be awful. And I think that, right now, Scorpio, you have powerful insights into that. And, that perhaps reminds us, that Scorpio knows about those great polarities, life and death, good and evil, light and dark, they all make sense to you deep down. And so, Scorpio, you do get it, you can get it, and don't feel that you're going to be overwhelmed. Don't feel that the truth is going to overwhelm you, because right now you're quite capable of handling the truth. If you couldn't handle the truth, you would not be perceiving the truth. But it's all there. It's all available for you. So, Scorpio, I think it's okay to use your sensitivity. Don't worry. It's not going to overwhelm you. And you don't have to personalize your insights. You can be quite objective about it, and a bit of knowledge can really help you. And perhaps the more knowledge you have, it's not you can just use this knowledge and your insights to help yourself to prepare for whatever's going to come, and perhaps you can pass on this knowledge to other people. So, Scorpio, perhaps you have a certain responsibility here, and don't close your eyes, because the truth of the matter, may be staring you in the face. Sagittarius, it's nice that the moon is moving through your sign for most of a weekend. Perhaps all of a weekend if you're in Australia and New Zealand. And with the moon moving through Sagittarius, you of course benefit from the fact that the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. So that mutual reception with Jupiter, the moon and Jupiter being in each other's signs, that means that the moon and Jupiter strengthen each other, and you have a growing sense of emotional maturity. And this emotional maturity has been developing since the summer. And you perhaps gained gaining an increasing insight into who you are and how your feelings work, and what you can deal with, what you can put up with. And so with this moon in Sagittarius, you can be free and open and know how far you can go. You're not, I don't think, going to overstep the mark. Although, moon in Sagittarius sometimes does overstep the mark. For example, being too open, perhaps being too tactless, revealing things too early or in too much detail. But I think at the moment you will know where to draw the line. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. And additionally, Sagittarius, it's possible that you can benefit from things which may be somewhat unpleasant. There are many, that really is a possibility. And you can go places that other people, don't want to touch. It might be a question of Sagittarians rushing in where angels fear to tread, but it's not really rushing in. Because that suggests a sort of a haste, but you're not really thinking it through. Rather, there are things that you're prepared to deal with that other people don't want to deal with, and if you're prepared to deal with them, they're quite happy for you to go about doing it. Why not? If you have got the ability and maybe a bit of courage. I'm not advocating that you do anything that is physically risky, but you can just go in directions that may be quite unique to you, and other people could be grateful. And it's possible over the course of a weekend that you may be able to benefit from someone else's misfortune, and that can work in many different ways. And it's not like you want another person to have a problem, to run into a disaster, but if someone is in trouble, they need help. and the process by which you help can in some way benefit you. I mean, it may benefit you because you make a new friend. I mean, it could be that you benefit in a financial or some other material way. So it can work out in different ways, but you shouldn't feel guilty. And in general, I think Sagittarius, you are able to deal with difficult subjects, and you're not afraid of dealing with things perhaps relating to death and destruction and the end of things. And you understand that life can be quite frustrating, but in the process you can deal with other people's frustrations, and you can perhaps provide some support. So this means, Sagittarius, that in some respects you are in quite a strong position. And I think that, going back to what I was talking about right at the beginning of this piece, I think that you have an emotional strength which some other people might not have. Capricorn. It's important, Capricorn, to get your timing right. You don't want to do everything at once, and you perhaps have to appreciate, there are going to be times of weakness, and this weekend, times when you're just not really ready to confront things, and you'll want to just be able to hold back, not feel that you have to commit yourself. But there are going to be other times when you can be incredibly present, and you can understand the situation, you'll know what to do, and straight away you will get the respect that you deserve. So it's not just a single timing. It's like, before this particular time of the weekend, I don't know, before midnight on Sunday you behave like this, and then after midnight on Sunday you behave like that. It's not quite like that. I think the timing will just alternate as the whole weekend progresses, and so it may just be sort of a constant flow. I think it was in yesterday's my video for yesterday, when I was talking to you, Capricorn. I was talking about ebb and flow, and I continue with that theme of ebb and flow, and it is a constant process, and this is why timing matters. And I think that if one had to generalize, I would have probably said that right at the beginning of a weekend, it's probably best that, if anything, you do hold back to an extent, but there are still going to be moments when you have to do something, where you have to say something, and that is because Mercury is making a trine to Saturn. And so with Mercury trine Saturn, Saturn is your ruler, there will be times this weekend where certainly there's something that needs to be said, and you're going to be the one that can speak with greatest authority. And so perhaps that's just a question of observation. Well, there'll be times when you're not in a position of authority, when you've got nothing useful to say, and then suddenly the topic changes, the concerns change, and like it or not, you're in the spotlight, and you've got something to contribute, and only you can contribute it. And so that might be how the Mercury trine Saturn works. And in general, with this Mercury trine Saturn, I think that your mind is going to be on very good form this weekend. And I don't mean that just in an intellectual sense. I mean that in an emotional sense as well. Or perhaps your heart's going to be on good form, or you're just going to be aware of the emotional dimension, and you're going to have a good idea about what other people are feeling, perhaps what you can get away with, and what other people can put up with. And additionally, you're going to be able to sort of navigate the emotional jungle. And it might be a bit of a jungle. I mean, not for you, but there is a lot of emotion flying around because there is a grand trine in water. Mercury's trine Jupiter, Mercury's trine Saturn, and Jupiter and Saturn are in trine, although that trine between Jupiter and Saturn doesn't become exact this year. And then at some stage in this weekend, it might be on Monday if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon moves into Capricorn. And, with the moon moving into Capricorn, well, that is a big change. And it's probably a change that it's going to make things better. I mean, the moon is going to be moving into an earth sign. And it's your earth sign, moon in Capricorn. And so when the moon moves into Capricorn, whenever it is, it'll be sometime on Sunday or early Monday, when that does happen, your time then will have really arrived, and you will definitely have something to contribute. Of course, it depends on what opportunities you have. I don't know what you're doing late on Sunday evening. Very often nothing much happens late on Sunday evening, but if you have the chance with the moon moving into Capricorn, you can perhaps take advantage of this change. And going back to your sense of timing, there may suddenly be a time where you have to do something, where you have to apply yourself to something, regardless of whether or not you're alone. It will just suddenly be the moment. The moment will have arrived, and you will be able to get yourself together. Aquarius. We still have a lot of stuff going on in Scorpio. And I know this is really boring because I've been talking about Scorpio in the Aquarius horoscope for a long time. But, we can't sort of deny it. Sometimes we do have to repeat ourselves. And I mean, this is the problem of doing daily horoscopes. It would be nice if every day was completely discrete. We have a series of completely different times. If you want discrete periods of time, well, then you can look at my I Ching. I mean, I Ching, every day has a different I Ching reading, and there they are, completely independent. But with astrology, one thing lasts. Something can last for. Well, it can last for decades in certain cases, like, once Pluto in Aquarius, well, it's, Pluto in your sign. Well, it's always going to be in your sign. Well, not always, but it's certainly going to be in your sign now until the 2040s. And I could talk about Pluto in Aquarius every single day. I'd get rather boring at that stage. But, with this stuff in Scorpio, and it's not just the fact that you've got 3 planets in Scorpio. I mean, you've also got Mercury in Scorpio, trine Jupiter, trine Saturn. And, it's a grand trine in water signs. Also, Saturn is your ruler. And so with Mercury trine Saturn, I would suggest, Aquarius, that you have a constructive weekend. And you might find, Aquarius, that it is just really easy to get things together. There just won't be much resistance. And, whatever it is you want to get together, and it might well have a material nature. It could be, for example, about money, or you're perhaps trying to organize yourself, or you're planning your future advances, and something you're trying to sort out with Mercury trine Saturn. It just makes perfect sense. And if you go into this weekend not being sure about something, or feeling that something has to be worked out, then that Mercury trine Saturn is really going to allow you to get it together and really come up with answers. Now, that assumes you're going to make the effort. I mean, it's possible that you do nothing and you just take everything for granted, and you think, well, you'll work it out next week. But if you work it out next week, why wait? Get it together now. Get it together this weekend. And I think that you can be, I think, very effective, and you shouldn't allow yourself to be distracted too much by other people, particularly on Sunday, because on Sunday there's a square between the moon and Saturn, and the moon in Sagittarius square Saturn in Pisces, and that might represent someone wanting your attention. I mean, you can give them your attention, but don't give them too much of your attention. Okay, you might have to be sensitive up to a point. It's possible that if you're not careful, you come over as being insensitive. You sort of brush someone off because you've got other priorities. But your other priorities do matter. And so I would suggest this weekend that you just keep going. You don't regard this weekend as being some island of inaction between Friday and Monday. I would just keep going on whatever is important to you, whatever you're working on. Just keep going, and I think that you will be able to cover a lot of ground, and you're going to feel good about it as well. You're going to feel that you're just doing something that is constructive, and you're getting closer and closer to your aims, whatever those aims might be. Pisces. There is a grand trine in water signs. I've been going on and on about this grand trine in water signs. And there's going to be another grand trine in water signs. Well, the same grand trine is, but kind of morphing into something else, because, right now, over the weekend, we've got grand trine in water signs. Mercury is trine Jupiter and Saturn. And then beginning of next week, we've got Mars trine Jupiter and Saturn. So a lot of stuff in water. And from a Pisces perspective, I think that this is a good thing. I mean, for a start, with all this stuff in water, you're very familiar with it. It all makes sense, and yeah, you are in your element, and so whatever you do, whatever you put your effort into, it should just work very easily. And so you shouldn't be afraid of any big battles. You might, for example, have something you want to do, but you don't want to do it because you think, it's just going to be too much effort, going to be too much stress. But when you actually get going on it, I think you'll find that it runs very quickly, almost runs too quickly. So that means that you can have a very constructive weekend. You can cover a lot, and part of the reason is that you've got Mercury making this trine to Jupiter and Saturn. Mercury, made the trine to Jupiter on Friday, and because Mercury trine Jupiter, Jupiter is your ruling planet, and I hope that was a constructive influence. Made you feel good about yourself and what you could achieve, and even better might have been if you were getting some support from other people. And then Mercury moves on to a trine of Saturn, and that Mercury trine Saturn is constructive. It's about Saturn. It's about making something real, and that's something you can really do at the moment. Now that Saturn has retrograded back into Pisces, you can create structure, and maybe you can also involve other people in that structure. So as far as I'm concerned, that does look really good, and at the same time you are thinking about what is important. You're not neglecting your core priorities, and you can be sensitive, but you also won't lose touch with what matters. On Saturday we've got Moon sextile Venus, and remember, Venus is in mutual reception with Saturn by exaltation. So Moon sextile Venus means that you can really think about what is important to you and how you can manifest your ambitions. And in the process, it's okay to be far-sighted, to think about possibilities which, maybe in the short term they're unrealistic, but that if you really are able to make the effort. No, in fact, you don't have to make much effort at all, because we've got a grand trine in water signs. If you just believe something is possible, maybe that's enough. Maybe we're talking about faith in your ability to be successful. I mean, faith on its own, of course, is not good enough. You've got to put in the work. But I think right now, Pisces, you are very much able to put in the work. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it is time to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 54, which is the marrying maiden. Now, normally, this hexagram is about going too quickly. The marrying maiden, she represents, or this hexagram represents, a young woman who is in a hurry to get married, and her hurry to get married is somewhat indecent, and there are certain rituals and formalities which need to be followed, and if she takes things too fast, this is just not the right way to behave. She's going to make a fool of herself, and also people should avoid the marrying maiden, someone who is in a hurry to get something done, to get something agreed. And of course, the marrying maiden can represent not just a woman who is desperate to get married, but a situation, whatever that situation is, which is asking you to make a commitment, which is perhaps too early, or maybe not even the right commitment. So it might be us being pressurized by another person or another party. I mean, it could be us. It could be us being the marrying maiden. So that's a warning there. I mean, don't be in too much of a hurry, and be aware of other people who are in a hurry, particularly if there's some kind of agreement involved. Now, the fifth line moves, and in the I Ching, the fifth line is often fortunate, and in this case it's fortunate as well. And this perhaps sees the marrying maiden in a different way. I mean, in one sense, more in a way that is quite literal. It talks about some kind of marriage where there is a degree of humility. For example, a woman of course this is ancient China, so perhaps a woman of elevated social status, perhaps marrying someone who is below her status. And the I Ching is saying, well, that is the right thing to do. So if we translate this to everyday life, what is going on this weekend, status and class may be an issue. I mean, maybe I'm not supposed to talk about class, but class is an issue. I mean, class is always there. I mean, there's always a class hierarchy. I mean, you might say, oh well, I'm from Britain. Britain is a class-ridden society. Well, to be honest, looking at America, I think America is, in some respects, even more class-ridden than the UK. But wherever you are, class is an issue, and so all of us have concepts of class and hierarchy, and the recommendation here, I think, is not to worry too much about class. It may be about having associations with people who are maybe above or below our particular station. And, it seems strange, and it seems perhaps slightly unnatural, but it's okay. And so it's perhaps this hexagram is advising a sort of a social fluidity. Don't make judgments about people. Whether you're judging someone saying, oh well, they're so elevated in the hierarchy that I can't get anywhere near them, or this person is below me. I don't need to worry about them. I won't take them too seriously. So those two different approaches of separation between classes is certainly not advocated here, and I think it's really suggesting that it can be a weekend where one can mix with many different people, and different people at the same time may shine in unexpected ways. So we mustn't underestimate anyone. We might regard someone as being not intelligent, not very knowledgeable, not educated, or could work the other way. We might regard them as being more educated than us, more intelligent than us, whatever. But we might have a set of expectations based on someone's position, and these expectations may be completely confounded. It could be that someone who is apparently in quite a sort of a low or a humble position suddenly shows themselves as being, a real sort of expert. It can be a real surprise. When talking about one's own prejudice, I mean, we all have prejudices, and we have expectations. I remember, when was it? It was in the I know it was in the late 80s. Some reason, I decided to do. I decided to do an Italian class in London. There was this thing where in London you could do all sorts of classes and whatever you wanted. And I thought, well, let me sign on for an Italian class. And so I signed on for this Italian class. I mean, I knew a bit of Italian because I'd been to Italy as a child. We always used to go to Italy on holiday, so I knew a bit. But this woman came in, and she was just like the bag lady. I mean, she just came in full of bags, loads of bags. She was West Indian, and she came in, and I was wondering, what is she doing here? And and that was my expectation. So I'd sort of made some assumptions about her, and then she sat down, and she was the best in Italian in the room. She just knew it. She was just a complete natural linguist, and she'd been through French. She was now getting on to Italian. She was just far above anyone else in the room, just about. And so that perhaps reflects back to this hexagram. The marrying maiden. We must absolutely not have expectations, and people can surprise us, and so it's perhaps asking us to sort of confront our own prejudices. And so this hexagram fifth line moves, and so because of this fifth line, it moves to a second line, and the line it moves to is hexagram number 58, which is the joyous. And so this is saying something about the weekend, and the joyous, we can take it literally. It can say that, perhaps things are really going to move this weekend. The joyous, I mean, it's the lake over the lake. This is the lake, and there's that trigram represents a lake. We've got a lake over a lake, and so it represents perhaps that grand trine in water. I mean, I don't want to mix up astrology and the I Ching, but it's kind of interesting that we've got the joyous, this very, very watery hexagram taking place on a weekend with this Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn grand trine. And so that does suggest that emotionally things really are moving, really are coming together. And so that could indicate that we can really have fun this weekend. Perhaps it's a good weekend for socializing, for having parties and so on. But we always have to be careful with the joyous, because there is a danger of complacency. And the reminder with the joyous is that we mustn't get infected by the merrymaking. And we do have to maintain our composure. And Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, he calls this hexagram, I think he calls it stand straight. And when he means stand straight, he means, I think he's talking about all that water, everything going on. But we have to be firm. We have to make sure we're not just overwhelmed and knocked over by the tide. We have to be aware. We have to stay sober, whatever's going on, so that we don't get just overwhelmed by it and just start doing something stupid and embarrass ourselves, or even miss an opportunity. So that's the I Ching, and I want to finish by looking at the White House and what's going on with the White House. So the story is, I haven't really been following this story that much, but I thought I'd better say something about it. And so let's start. Well, where do we start? Well, Donald Trump has decided he wants to rebuild a section of the White House, the East Wing. And the East Wing, I think the East Wing, I mean, there have been work on the East Wing in various forms, certainly in 1902, and they made some small. Theodore Roosevelt did something in 1902, but there was really big work that started in 1942, and perhaps to expand the bureaucracy, they needed to do something else. They needed office spaces, or whatever. Of course, that would have been the first year of America's entrance into the Second World War. And so the East Wing, I mean, I don't know anything about the East Wing really, but I've heard of the East Wing. You've got the East Wing and you've got the West Wing. And yeah, so Donald Trump, he wanted to knock it down and build a ballroom, which would be incredibly extravagant. Donald Trump, he likes gold and Corinthian arches, and it can, I don't know, is it 90,000 square feet, and it can seat 650 people. But anyway, that's what he wants to do. Now, it's not the government having to pay for this. There are donors, and I think it's cost something like, I think $300 million. I mean, that is a lot of money. I mean, I know it's the White House, but still, $300 million strikes me as being quite an excessive amount. So, he wasn't, and he was talking about it, and there was a convention where there was some committee he should have asked about it. But anyway, he just went and did it. And you could argue that this is a load of history completely wiped out. Although you could also say that this happened. If you look at the White House's history, I mean, it was first occupied in 1800. Of course, in 1814, the British burnt the White House down. So dramatic things have always happened to the White House. So maybe Donald Trump's critics are perhaps going a bit sort of over the top here. I mean, that's a view. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying, when I talk about Donald Trump in this context, not to express any views. So, where does one start? Well, one could start with Donald Trump himself. So I'm not going to spend too long on Donald Trump's chart because, over time I've talked about it a great deal. But I always come back to this fact with Donald Trump that he hasn't got any Earth in his chart. And I do wonder about this Earth. I mean, Earth is about grounding. And you could argue that Earth may also be about history. I mean, in a way, it's about history. It's about tradition. I mean, you need something to hold on to. And I do notice, maybe it's just me, but I notice history does get destroyed quite a lot in the US. Okay, it gets destroyed in other places. But, I've noticed, in the city I'm living in, how the city, they seem to have a very selective view of the city's history. They will knock down things of really important historical value, as far as I can see, to the city. But there will be certain other aspects of the city's history that they regard as being really precious, because they want to pursue a particular narrative. But overall, there doesn't seem to be a great sense of history here. I mean, because I come from the UK, and in the UK there's this concept of listed buildings, and if something is a grade 1 listed building, no one could knock it down. And in the US they don't quite have this concept of the listed building. I mean, I know there are buildings that you can't just knock down, but it's much more restricted than in the UK. And so things change, and there is this view that buildings don't last very long. You don't have you don't have this sort of history here. A building, you build it, and then after a few decades, you just knock it down and start again. And so maybe Trump, with his lack of earth, and of course the United States has a lack of earth as well. So here is the United States' chart. The United States, okay, it's got Neptune in Virgo and Pluto in a Capricorn, but it's got no traditional planets in Earth signs. And so I think that Trump, to an extent, does reflect this lack of earth, and perhaps this lack of grounding. And I think history is part of a country's grounding, and if you constantly knock things down, then I think you might lose touch with something that is quite important. So as far as the White House is concerned, one possible date for the White House is November the 1st, 1800. I don't know what time it is, but this is when people started living in the White House. I mean, it had been built since, I think the cornerstone or the foundation stone was laid in 1792. But this is a chart, for the White House. And November the 1st, you can see that there's Earth here. We've got Moon and Mars in Taurus. I mean, the White House is still in existence. It's not like Trump has knocked down the whole White House. I mean, it shows that, regardless of what I just said about America's history, there is a tradition. I mean, you haven't had real revolutions in America. You kind of have a rule of law, and you have a continuity to the US. So I'm kind of contradicting myself, but you have one election leads to another election. You have an election every 4 years, and that is, I think, something very worthy about America, that they're able to persist with that every 4 years. Even when you've had wars, when you had the 1812 war, when you had the Second World War, they still kept the elections going. Unlike the UK, which cancelled all its elections during the Second World War. I mean, probably they still had by-elections, but they cancelled the general elections there. But perhaps that Moon-Mars conjunction in Taurus does indicate, the persistence of the White House as this where the president lives, and so the question one has is, does this chart work? Can we use this as a chart? Can we look at the transits in this chart to give us some idea about what is happening to the White House? So the first big event that happened to the White House was it got burnt down by the British. And the British burnt the White House down on August the 24th, 1814. I've gone for 11 p.m. I mean, I think it was late in the evening that the White House was burnt down. So here is a chart for the White House being burnt down. And it's kind of fitting that there's a Sun-Mars conjunction in Virgo. And maybe it's not the Virgo that matters. Sun and Mars, regardless of their sign, are quite fiery. They can represent explosions, things getting destroyed. So that Sun-Mars conjunction, it is perhaps quite fitting. Yeah, I mean, there's also fire in the chart. Venus went into Leo, perhaps the day before the White House got burnt down, and the moon was in late Sagittarius. So maybe that chart is kind of fitting. Nothing angular though. Well, no, Mercury is angular, but then I don't really know the exact time that it happened. So the question is, what about transits? Did the White House have bad transits on August the 24th, 1814? So this Sun-Mars conjunction hits the White House's Mercury-Pluto square. So there was a Mercury-Pluto square at the time when the White House was first moved into on November the 1st, 1800. Now, you could say, well, Pluto wasn't quite discovered in 1800, but I don't think that matters. We certainly know after the event that Venus is square Pluto. And so having a Sun-Mars conjunction square Venus. I mean, Venus, you could say, is about decoration, what something looks like. And Sun and Mars is just the British going in and just looting the place, just being vandals. That's perhaps what the British did. They did a similar thing in China, didn't they, when they destroyed the Forbidden City? But of course, by then it was the Americans and the Germans, and everyone else was helping. But that was later in the 19th century. And so I would have said with that Sun-Mars conjunction, there is some Sun-Mars conjunction hitting the White House's Venus. There is some evidence that the chart is working. So I think that that's something to note. Also, look at Venus. Venus was making a sextile to the White House's Uranus at 0 degrees Libra. So maybe the White House having Uranus on the Aries point is perhaps the White House. This is saying something about the White House. So every now and then, someone's going to destroy it, or going to do something dramatic, whether it's the British burning it down or Donald Trump deciding to demolish the East Wing. So maybe that's kind of hard-coded into the White House's chart. And then there is Trump's knocking down the East Wing. And so here is the horoscope for the chart for the East Wing demolition. I don't know what time it started. I've gone for 9 in the morning. But I don't know, maybe it was earlier. So, I mean, don't take the ascendant too seriously, but I've gone for an Aries chart for this. So the day of the demolition, it happened on a day of a Mercury-Mars conjunction. So Mercury-Mars really does emphasize Mars, and what he did, what happened to the White House was newsworthy. To many, it was upsetting. Maybe if a Democrat president had knocked down the East Wing, he wouldn't have got so much criticism from the mainstream media. I don't know, but I mean, Mercury, Mars conjunction, and true Black Moon Lilith. So that's a difficult day, and Neptune was still in Aries, and Neptune still being in Aries and perhaps that is a reminder that Neptune is on the United States' IC. I mean, it's been on the IC for a long time. It's not like this was the day that Neptune was on the United States' IC, but just a reminder that here is the United States' chart. If we take 5:10 p.m. as a timing of the Declaration of Independence, Neptune is on at 1 degrees 3 Aries. And so maybe this gives us some insight into what it means for the United States to have Neptune on its IC. I mean, the IC represents the foundations of things. Perhaps it represents one's history. And Neptune on the IC is this historic monument, or this historic extension, the East Wing, being knocked down. And this may say something about other aspects of the United States. Well, particularly if you are an opponent of Trump. I mean, I understand that there'll be people watching this with different views, and there is a view amongst Trump's opponents that he is destroying everything. He's attacking tradition and so on. And so that could be Neptune on the IC, this foundational building, the White House being attacked by Trump, and him just replacing it with all this gilt and gold, and it strikes me as being a rather tasteless, but anyway, that may be a reflection of Neptune on the IC. And then turning to the White House itself, to the chart of the White House. So here it is. We'll put the White House, the November the 1st, 1800 chart in the middle, and we'll put the East Wing demolition on the outer wheel. And the White House, on November the 1st, 1800, Mars was at 1904 Taurus. Probably somewhere in that day, when they moved in. And there was a Mercury-Mars conjunction on the day the East Wing was demolished at Mars was at 1922 Scorpio, Mercury was at 1931 Scorpio. So that Mercury-Mars conjunction was exactly opposition the White House's Mars. Mars opposition Mars, Mercury opposition Mars. I think that is really fitting for a demolition. Mars in Taurus represents the stability of the White House. It's been this monument. People have heard of the East Wing. It's been part of people's understanding of America and its buildings. Mars in Taurus, and then Mercury, Mars in Scorpio comes along and the East Wing gets destroyed. Although you could say it's transformation. It's not a destruction of the White House. The East Wing goes. This Trumpian ballroom comes in its place. Maybe that's just Scorpio transforming from one thing into another. Maybe. So anyway, those are a few thoughts on the White House. I think that there is some evidence here, looking at the horoscope or the transits at the time of the demolition of the East Wing, plus at the time of the British burning down the White House in 1814, there is some suggestion that this chart set for November the 1st, 1800 does seem to work. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say of the White House. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.